Hi YouTube, Darth here. I did the 5 best maps, and by popular request, here are the 5 worst maps of Battlefield 4. Now I know I'll probably mention some maps here that are somebody's favorite, but these are not just my personally disliked maps, but they are also deeply flawed maps. I'll talk about what I don't like about these top 5 worst maps, and what balance data has to say about them. Again, I'll be referencing information collected by Machi MIB that I'll link in the description below. So let's get to this woeful collection. At number 5 is Rogue Transmission. One of the vanilla maps of Battlefield 4, it's also the most popular of the top 5 I'll mention today. I've always thought that Rogue Transmission was one of the more painfully mediocre maps in Battlefield 4. Despite being impressive to look at, the Levolution on Rogue Transmission does almost nothing to change how the map plays. It makes it slightly more difficult for cowardly snipers to perch on their stoops, but for the most part it's a trivial difference. What isn't a trivial difference though is the huge disparity in balance on Rogue Transmission. More than 3 out of 4 games are won by the Russian team, and almost half of all games are total blowouts. There could be a lot of reasons for this, but the simplest explanation is that the map layout is just absolutely terrible. The Russian gimme at Alpha is well protected, while the Chinese, or sometimes American, gimme point at Echo is directly adjacent to 2 others and in easy walking distance. Another hilariously bad feature of this map is the total level designer troll bait of the attack chopper at Delta. It looks pretty tempting, right? Well, I think I see about 90% of choppers taking off from this point explode on the pad, and it's not like they have that much of a place to hide once they do get airborne. Furthermore, remember at launch how the mobile anti-aircraft only spawned for the Russian team at Charlie? That's since been patched, but it makes me wonder how this map ever got made, or if it was ever balance tested. I've had interesting and even fun matches on Rogue Transmission, which is why it's only number 5, but this is definitely one of the worst of Battlefield 4 and deserving of the number 5 spot. Next up is what I like to call the Fustercluck of vehicles, Dragon Pass. When describing the development of this map, the developers at DICE mentioned how they took inspiration from the Battlefield 2 Dragon Valley map. Well, it doesn't show, and it's probably telling that we eventually got an actual remake of a far superior map, because Dragon Pass, specifically on Conquest Large, is a terrible map. But why is it so bad? Well, I could talk about the fact that it needlessly has every vehicle with the exception of the attack boats, or that it has 4 mobile anti-aircraft. But instead I'm going to focus on the awful pacing of the map. Now thankfully the developers had some mercy on us, and there's an odd number of flags which in theory increases the burn speed of this map. In practice though, this map still takes a terrifying amount of time to complete a match. Particularly because capturing the furthest points is very infrequent and the map almost never has any dynamism. The vast gulf between the points in the north means that they are effectively static and unchanging for most of the match. So almost all the action happens between Foxtrot and Delta, which means that for most of the match only a single point is in contention. Let's say that you're one of the hapless individuals who actually wants to push one of the outer points. Well, after it takes you the better part of 2 minutes to get where you're going, you're probably going to be alone against any reinforcements. For a good player, that's likely going to be a coin toss as to whether you take that point or not. And because the points are so spread out, you get almost no leverage from backcapping. It's not a terribly unbalanced map, quite the opposite actually. But it is insanely boring unless you ignore 90% of the map. I've seen this map clear more than one server with everybody quitting, which is probably why it's the 3rd least played map in the game. Don't play Dragon Pass, play Dragon Valley instead. Dragon Valley does everything better. Next up in everybody's favorite expansion pack, Altai Range takes my number 3 worst map spot. Here's a map that maybe had some potential once, but feels like it was the map that Rush Delivery gave us. When this map was released, community members did some digging and discovered that Altai Range was originally going to have a weather levolution effect where heavy snow rolled in. That was dropped because of resource constraints, and maybe that would have been cool, but Altai Range would have still been an overly large map with balance issues. Again, another map that DICE felt needed not 1, not 2, but 4 mobile anti-aircraft. Although it is somewhat unique in the fact that it has 4 attack helicopters, they have literally nowhere to go on this wide open map. Altai Range has poor balance to match its poor pacing. Over 40% of matches end in one-sided ticket scores. The US team wins roughly 18% more frequently than the Chinese team, and I suspect that it may partly have to do with the placement of the center point and that the only tank on the map spawns closer to the American team at Charlie. On 64-player servers, it's pretty easy to get stranded at the ring of points around the map. Worse still, if an enemy vehicle comes along, there's almost nothing to hide behind at these points, so you just get mulched trying to defend. Infantry can stick to a corridor between Echo, Delta, and Foxtrot, but for the most part this map defies good infantry play outside of Delta. If I were to improve this map, I think bringing in all the points closer to Delta would do quite a lot for the map. It would also probably help somewhat with the imbalance. As it stands, you'll be extremely lucky to have a KPM of over 0.5 on Altai range. Low action, low motivation to defend points, and imbalanced. Definitely one of the worst in Battlefield 4. If you couldn't get behind my choices to this point, I think we'll all agree on my number 2 choice, Lancang Dam. Back when Battlefield 4 was but a gleam in our eyes, DICE ran a competition for players to design their own map. I can't help but wonder if Luton's wonderful dam map concept is what DICE used for inspiration for Lancang Dam. Luton's concept was great, it was simple and presented interesting gameplay concepts. But Lancang Dam is an utter disaster of a map. It's a giant horseshoe where the MAA can shoot into the spawn of the opposing team. But wait, there's more. In the levolution for the dam, a big rock falls, and some paths that are effectively outside the level are changed. Oh, and every vehicle in the game is also on Lancang Dam, including the AC-130. Sound like fun? I thought so! If ever there was a map that could benefit from less is more, Lancang would probably be that map. I like vehicles, but this is not the right map for every vehicle in the game to be present. Take away the jets, the MAA, reduce it to transports and LAVs like the night version of Shanghai, and there'd probably be an interesting map here. You could even leave the tanks, just trim the fat. As it stands, Lancang is the least popular map in the game and not well balanced. The Russian team wins almost 50% more frequently than the Chinese team. The matches aren't terribly skewed though, which isn't surprising given its mirrored layout. I think about Shanghai and why that map works despite a very similar horseshoe setup. Shanghai has more mobility thanks to the center tower, smaller map, and the two teams can't shoot into each other's spawns. I don't really hate Lancang, I just find it to be exceptionally sucky and mediocre, and easily befitting of the title of number 2. Well, Battlefield 4 has a lot of mediocre maps, and I wanted to call attention to a particular few that aren't necessarily the worst, but are still pretty bad. The first on the dishonorable mentions is Caspian Border 2014. What happened to this map in its translation from Battlefield 3? It wasn't bad there, and maybe a bit annoying to be pummeled from the air, but what about the map said, let's make it a prison with a giant wall? Well, unsurprisingly, this also unbalanced the map in the favor of the US team in a major way. Why? Next is Gulf of Oman 2014, the map that DICE can never seem to balance for the US team in any battlefield, as 45% of matches still end in a lopsided victory. Add to that the sandstorm, which I'm fairly certain nobody wanted. I don't really care about the sandstorm, and I still enjoy this map from time to time, but it's definitely not any better in Battlefield 4 for its changes. Operation Whiteout is a borderline map that, for me, takes too long to play because of its even flag layout. Combined with the long haul between the flags, and you're in for a fun run if you're stranded. Some of the problems with this map were alleviated in the testing on the CTE, but it's still a map that definitely caters to the scout helicopter aficionados and snipers, and players that like a 5K simulator. Next, one last snow map in the dishonorable mentions, Operation Locker. DICE took the concept of the map that's just a tube and made it into essentially 2 tubes. It's not quite as bad as my number 1 pick, but the lack of innovation by players that play Operation Locker definitely makes it one of my least favorite to play, and probably where half of my Rageaholic videos come from. Operation Metro 2014. It's everybody's favorite terrible map. In a lot of my complaints about today's maps, I've talked about pacing. For the most part, these large maps had bad pacing because they are too slow. Metro, on the other hand, has bad pacing because it is a constant murder grind festival. There are no vehicles, and there is really no strategy other than to hope to sneak past the lines of entrenched players. It's no surprise that this map ends favorably for the Russians more frequently than the US team. It's also no surprise that the only state Metro has is a stalemate. Metro ends in lopsided victories and a game-high 51.7% of all matches played on Metro. I'd say this map would be where you should go if you wanted to practice your close quarters combat, but it's really more of a game of whack-a-mole for the defending team than actual gunplay. Attempting to push is the most frustrating exercise in futility in Battlefield. I've had a very few precious games that were mobile running pitched battles. Those were amazing. But the natural state of 64-player Metro is a giant fustercluck at Bravo. DICE had a chance to cure some of the problems with Metro, and ultimately they chose to leave it mostly intact because according to the developers, that's the way people like it. I don't fault DICE for bringing back this terrible map. The reason people play this map is to pad stats and farm experience. But if all you play is Metro, you're probably not getting any better at the game. Now to be fair, I played a lot of rounds of Metro, though not because I'm grinding stats or XP. Maybe I'm chasing the promise of that breakthrough because it really is a challenging map to beat the stalemate. But when you do and you backcap the enemy, utter chaos usually ensues and it feels amazing to have changed the course of the game. Usually though, the game ends with me slamming my fists into my desk with rage and wondering how Battlefield 3 maps like Metro got remade and Sign Crossing and Grand Bazaar got left by the wayside. But for as bad as Metro is, it's not the worst in the franchise. That dubious honor goes to the block and hardline on 64 player. That's it for this list of the worst maps in Battlefield 4. I'm sure plenty of people love some of the maps I've listed today. I'd love to hear what you like about them, why you play them, and more specifically what your top 5 worst maps are. I talk a lot about pacing in today's video, and if you'd like to hear more about my thoughts on pacing, check the video links at the end. If you're new around here, take a moment to check out my channel and please consider subscribing. As always, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time, YouTube.